Hello there and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Craig Telfer and on this occasion I am joined by my close associate Shaughan McGuigan.
Hello there.
And you know what happens when the Dapper Laughs and Emily Maitlis of the Terrace get together? That is right. One of us is going to turn up on Newsnight in a roll-neck sweater, show contrition for a series of unpleasant vines and public comments, retire the character that brought us so much success, and then reintroduce him into public life just a couple of months later. And then hopefully we'll talk a little bit about lower league Scottish football along the way.
Remember we done, just before the television show started, we done a Terrace live show at the university, and you, I can't remember if you did turn up dressed like Dapper last, but did you not say that's how you were going to turn up?
No, I think that was for actually the pilot of the television show. I wore a roll-neck sweater. Actually, that's a good point. Actually, for the pilot of A View from the Terrace, I dressed up in a roll-neck sweater and suit, much like Dapper Laughs did when he appeared on Newsnight in 2014, I think it was. But the guys had said, you look really weird compared to everyone else. Should you dress in something else? Have you got anything else you can wear? And I had just like an overshirt and t-shirt, so wore that instead. And it looked far more appropriate for what we were doing.
Also, Dapper Laughs is probably not somebody to aspire to. I suppose some dreadful stuff in that time period from him.
It really was. I mean, it really was. Was Dapper Laughs the symptom or the cause of it all? I don't know, but it really was. It was a real low point for comedy. Those 6-second sex secrets that he used to do, and some really, really nasty stuff. Imagine just going about your daily business and this guy just comes up and just shoves a phone in your face and pranks you. Or or him and his mate one lie dows behind you and he shoves you over. Just really obnoxious. And he is now, I think he's not necessarily made a comeback, not to the same degree that he had previously, but I think he is now posting on these sort of like right-leaning podcasts about how he was cancelled and how you can't say anything these days and so on.
I'm glad he's been cancelled. I'm glad I've not seen him for a long time.
Well, Shaughan, I'm glad that I was able to bring him back into your consciousness. Go and watch his interview. You can still get it on YouTube. It's his interview, him and Emily Maitlis. I watched it just before I jumped on this call with you. So,
how did it come across? I would have to go back. I did watch it at the time.
It deeply embarrassed, but she's got him on strings. It's like it's that way where I think that he was absolutely appalled at the degree of backlash that was at, and so he basically, that way he says, "Listen, never. I'm so sorry. Never again. I'm really, really sorry. It should never have happened." So apologetic, and then probably after the fact, just kind of thinking, actually, why was I apologising so much for? I don't think I did anything wrong. Why should I apologise? I watched his, you can't get it anymore sadly, but it was on Amazon Prime, Dapper Laughs the Resurgence, his comedy stand-up special.
Sorry, I'm just buckled with the fact that you said, unfortunately, you can't get it anymore.
I used to watch it quite regularly. Like you're doing the dishes or something, you want something to watch, I would stick Dapper Laughs' Resurgence on.
I can't imagine a single scenario in my life where I would decide I had to watch that.
There's a trailer on YouTube for it. You can watch the trailer, and that pretty much means if that's the best bits, then
I think I'd just rather wash your dishes.
Yeah, that's fine. Listen, well, you wash the dishes. I'll watch the Resurrection, followed by a couple episodes of Badil Syndrome. Really. Really get to grips with reintroduce myself to some good old-fashioned British comedy. But listen, we're not here to talk about comedy. We're not here to have a laugh, We are here to do, I suppose it's a mini review of the season just past, but it's a mini review with a bit of a twist, because rather than going through all 30 teams in the Championship, League 1 and League 2, which would take so long to do, and we're at that stage where there's a bit of turmoil. I mean, the season hasn't actually finished yet. I mean, that's properly going to be finishing on Monday when we've got the Premiership playoff final second leg. It's quite difficult to do that, especially when teams are turning over their squads. Contract talks are ongoing. Some teams haven't announced who's staying and who's going yet, and so on. So rather than doing that, we thought it would be quite good to really pick out a club, a player and a manager who had a good season, and a club, a player and a manager who had a bad season. And really just kind of have a wee bit of a chat about them. So 12 talking points, 12 opportunities for having a laugh, 12 opportunities not taken, probably. So that's effectively what it's going to be. We've Shaughan and I have each picked one from each bracket, and we're just going to have a chat about it.
Class.
Everything good with yourself? First, I always like checking in before we get into the football.
Absolutely fine. For me, not done too much since I last spoke to you on Sunday morning. What about you? I think you have been busy, to be fair, since I last spoke to you.
Yes, I had an absolutely superb time on Sunday. I was asked to host Dundee United's Player of the Year Awards for the season just past, and it was one of the best working days I think I've ever had. It was absolutely superb. On the Saturday, they were playing Aberdeen, and that had a lot riding on it. Basically, if Dundee United won that match, they would qualify for Europe. And I was completely locked in to what was happening because I knew what happened on the Saturday would colour everything that happened on the Sunday. And with Aberdeen going behind, Aberdeen taking the lead, and St Mirren even going ahead against Celtic, you're thinking, oh my goodness, Dundee United are going to finish in sixth. This is going to be the season, despite getting into the top six, it feels like it's quite a flat end to the season. And then when the scores turned around and United got those 2 goals in quick succession, just delighted, actually, probably like, yes, at the full-time whistle. And that's the second event I've worked for Dundee United. I worked at their gala dinner a couple of months previously, and particularly like Mark Cunningham, Luke Bain, the 2 guys that was especially working close by with, just really, really nice guys, put a lot of work into it. To the smooth running of it, and it just made my job really easy, and it was class. I had a great night, and just good to. I mean, although I'm not especially close to Dundee United, but just good to, when people are just really happy and having a good time with something. That was quite good to be a part of.
I saw you describing it on Instagram. You said about the fact that there was quite a raucous evening. They looked like you were wearing was that a tuxedo?
A tuxedo, yeah.
You also put up a picture of Jim Spence in a tuxedo. I'd say you, in terms of going back to the word dapper, I'd say you probably just top trumped him in terms of dapperness.
The reason I put Jim Spence in there was because I thought, well, people are going to swipe through the photos and you'll get a wee surprise at the end. That was the only reason he went in there. So I thought I'll get a surprise. But I got a message. From my girlfriend. She had liked it. So your notification when somebody you follow likes your post, but notification you liked it, and then a message comes through saying, "Who's that guy in the third picture in your Instagram?" And I thought, oh no, I have got a lot of explaining to do. I've got a lot of explaining about the connection I have with Jim Spence. So I've saved it for the next time I'm seeing her. I thought rather than write it all out, it's probably best that I just explain to her about Jim Spence and our 10-year connection that we've shared.
I mean, let's face it, if you're going to write everything down, that would be like a kind of essay. It would be a tome that you would have to send to her. The other thing I wanted to ask was, you mentioned that, I think you said something that Jim Goodwin gave you a bit of a hard time on stage. So I am very interested to hear what this was about. So
I think that Dundee United, I think on the whole, Dundee United had a really good season. I think that you'd have to say objectively, Dundee United have had a really good season. The fact that the team went into the championship, came out of the championship, beg your pardon, and I think that at the time we had maybe said that we weren't sure if Jim Goodwin was going to stay on as manager. Mm-hmm. But he's come in, done very well, taken them into the top half of the table, which no one expected, and then even got them European football, which is a really impressive achievement. And he, his backroom team, and the players all deserve a bit of credit. And at the start of the night, once the players and the manager came through, everyone's up cheering them, singing songs. The chairman, Mark Ogren's, done a speech, and then Jim Goodwin's come up and he's been presented with a framed jersey commemorating his 100 games in charge of Dundee United. And he's on stage. I'm doing a wee Q&A with him, and we were talking about the season and talking about like basically the last run of games and so on. And he said something on stage that's, people in the media, people like yourself, Craig, have perhaps written us off, accused us of downing tools and all that. And I can assure you, we've not downed tools, and everyone's laughing at that. And in my head, I'm thinking, I don't think I've really said anything about Dundee United or Jim Goodwin. And I was sort of taken aback in that way, where it must look like, oh, he's absolutely shat it. But in a way where it was like, the Rolodex in your mind is trying to spin through and trying to connect with something you might have said about Dundee United. But I couldn't really remember. So anyway, very, very funny, like to have the mick taken out of you on stage. But fast forward about into the dinner after, so with the kind of the speeches at the start, Jim Goodwin is presented with his jersey, and then we have lunch. Sorry, we have dinner. After dinner, I go into the bathroom, and I'm going for a piss, and Rory Payton's there, and I'm up next to Rory Payton, and he's like, "What were you saying about us, by the way? Were you calling us shite? Have you been slagging us off all season? You've been calling us shite?" And I was like, honestly, mate, I've no idea what he was talking about. I said, "I think you guys have had a really good season on the whole." He says, "That's not what the manager says. The manager says you've been slagging us off. You've been calling us shite." And then who walks into the toilet? Fucking Jim Goodwin. Right? And Rory Payton turns to him and says, Gaffer, what was he been saying about us? He'll not tell me. He won't tell me. What's he been saying to us? And he says, "Aye, he was on that TV show of his when I was Aberdeen manager, calling me shite and slagging me off." And Rory Payton's like, "Is that what it was?" And he says, "But don't worry, Rory, you've probably not seen it. Not a lot of people watch his show." I was like, brilliant. Absolutely done me there. Absolutely done me. I got speaking to him after when the event had wrapped up, and like all these people tend to be really, really sound guy, really funny, and just I think he was like relieved more than anything else by how the season gone. He was talking about just, when people now are on their phones and know what the scoreline is and that transmits onto the pitch and all that. So I think he was just relieved to have all done it. But really nice guy, and he was saying that he doesn't, if the team aren't playing well or he's not doing well, he expects that that people will make comments about it. And that was the consequence of that. So it's quite funny to see these things come face to face like that. But very, very funny, and just like I say, just a brilliant night working with a great bunch of people and getting to celebrate it as well. So great time.
That sounds class, and a level of patter like that you probably wouldn't get with Jim Spence. So fair play.
But listen, I think with this podcast, it's probably important to start off by saying, Shaughan, we're not going to be discussing like teams. Well, there'll be some stuff we've discussed, but I can assure it's like when we come to talk about the best manager, it's not going to be like Michael McIndoe. When we talk about a club that's at a bad time, it's not about Queen's Park and going on about them. We've actually put a little bit of thought into this. So it's a wee bit different, because we know our thoughts on those, if anyone's who's listened to the podcast recently. And on top of that, Fowler did put a Patreon podcast out. It was called The Final Time We'll Be Talking About Michael McIndoe in 24-25 with Ali Moncrief, who is an Edinburgh City supporter that we've mentioned a couple of times. So if you want to hear about Michael McIndoe, that's your last chance this season, because we're not going to be discussing him on the show. But Shaughan, we'll start with a good club. Who is your good club?
So an interesting one to start with, because I went for Ayr United. Right, I went for Ayr United, and to be fair, I suppose we've both tried to avoid maybe teams that we have spoken about a lot recently, and Edinburgh. I suppose the only thing I would say is I've got in contact with Alistair Gemmell to try and back up my claim that Ayr United have had a good season, and ultimately he came back to say, I don't think we did. So already my argument is on shaky ground. I suppose what I would say is, I think if you were to go through, other than the league winners and Livingston and Edinburgh, who we've spoken about a lot, I think you're already kind of struggling to come up with teams who have maybe punched above their weight or maybe done something unexpected. But I think in terms of where Ayr United were the season previous, in terms of where they've ended up in terms of the season that's just finished, I appreciate it fizzled out, but I still think that this is one of the better Ayr United seasons and better Ayr United sides I can remember, which is ultimately why I went for them, I suppose.
Shaughan, I don't like disagreeing with you, but I think of all the clubs that you picked for this, is like when you said have a good season, Ayr United, I thought that you must be one of the very few people in the country that are probably saying that. The reasons I'm disagreeing with you, I think at the beginning of the season, expected to challenge for promotion. Ultimately, they did that, but then I actually thought they would challenge to win the league title. They didn't do that. They ended up finishing some distance away from Livingston and Falkirk at the top of the table, and then they were really bad in that second game against Partick Thistle. And
Okay.
and so just because of that, I think that a lot of, I don't want to speak for Ayr United supporters, but I mean, I always like Alistair's a really decent barometer, someone that's quite fair minded. But if he's saying that it's been a bit of a flop, then I'd be inclined to agree with him.
Yes, I know, and I really wish I'd asked Alistair Gemmell before picking Ayr United. However, to go over the points that you've made, like in terms of the Falkirk side and the Livingston team that they finished behind, I think it would be, I think it's safe to say that both of those teams were much better than Ayr. Like, don't you think? Like, I don't think for a minute that finishing third was a poor result for Ayr. They were on paper and on the park worse than Livingston and worse than Falkirk. Third felt about right. And I just felt that the fact that you're not going to have Falkirk in the league, you're not going to have Livingston, well, potentially might have Livingston in the league who might not have as much money to invest next time around. If St Johnstone come down again, will they be as good as Falkirk were this season? Not quite so sure. I just think that Ayr have given themselves a pretty good base to build on going into next season.
Right, I can see what you. I can maybe see what you're saying by that. And I think it was quite interesting when their released players was announced. I think that was yesterday, and I think there's a lot of they've still got a lot of players on their books, and I think that squad will need to be freshened up a bit. I think that the issues haven't really gone away. I think they'll still need a goalkeeper. That's something, or certainly, or somebody that Brown can actually trust is really important. I think at fullback, surprised to see guys like Paddy Redding and Nick McAllister still being retained. I think there's perhaps, and I think there's guys like Fraser Bryden still in the books. I think that it's maybe in everyone's best interest that he goes elsewhere. So I do think there is still quite a lot of surgery on that team to be made. Maybe I suppose they're probably in a good place to go to challenge again next season. But I wonder now if what people's thoughts are about Scott Brown as manager, because he was there for about a year and a half, and I suppose the club are in a better place than they were previously. But I think just being in a better place isn't quite good enough.
But I think, so to be fair, I would have to go back and check. But I think that this Ayr United team can't be too far away points-wise from the Wraith Rovers side that finished second the season before. And I know, like, the whole scoring goals in the last minute, that ultimately is what made Wraith Rovers fans season, because obviously getting late winners is just a good laugh. It feels like Ayr United have had a similar season results-wise and performance-wise without having the last-minute laughs and the last-minute shenanigans. Now, whether that is enough to say Ayr United had a good season, I don't know. But I think based on what I've seen from Ayr in the past, I thought that was enough to warrant Ayr having to suggest that Ayr have had a good season.
Maybe you might be right. Depends. I suppose it depends on if you're sort of more pragmatic and you're like a bigger picture guy, and who knows, might be back here in 12 months and talking about Ayr United again in a podcast like this and saying that all the building blocks were put in place in the 24-25 season and they were able to flourish the next year and win the championship and go into the top flight or whatever. Or you could say that at the beginning of the season, having seen them, who did they beat? Was it Airdrie they played in the television and were outstanding against them? Yep. Absolutely destroyed them. When I saw them in the flesh, albeit that you got to say it's quite a low level, but when I saw them for against Stennismuir, really impressed by them, really impressed by how well coached they looked. And I just don't think they've quite lived up to that. So maybe that's...
I suppose I think both of the games you've just described, they still had Anton Dowds, who was scoring a ridiculous amount of goals at the start of the season. And again, I appreciate that the injuries impacts every single team. But I do think that had an impact. But regardless, I thought they were still able to cope with that to a degree and still put in what I thought was bearing in mind they were still challenging with maybe a third of the season to go. I think they done reasonably well.
Okay, well, fair enough. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just slightly kind of going like that. I can see what you're saying, but I think that saying Ayr United have had a good season, we'll revisit that in 12 months. I'll give you I'll give you a good club then as well. Or do you,
Okay.
how do you want? In fact, you can ask one from me, Shaughan. Give me whatever you want to hear from.
Well, let's do the same. Let's go for your
Cool.
whatever club you're suggesting have had a good season.
Well, I went for Inverness Caledonian Thistle, and this might be a bit of weird. Again, you're screwing your face up for a team that perhaps wasn't up until the final couple of games of the season when they secured their League One status.
Yep.
What I would say is, though, I mean, and it's easy to say, had it not been for the 15-point deduction, but not being that 15-point deduction, their points total, they'd have finished in second place, ahead of like Cove Rangers and Queens, and put Stennismuir into fifth place in the outside the playoffs. And I think that where they have come from to where they are now, it's been a good, well, not a good journey. It's been quite a painful journey. But I think the club appear to be in a much better place now than they were 12 months ago. I think, excuse me, if you remember, we'd have finished up the season and they were talking about this dismal relegation at Accies, talking about moving to Kelty, like they're moving the training base Lockstock to Kelty, which would be an absolute disaster for them. Although you can maybe see it if you're looking at it purely objectively and you didn't have a heart and didn't understand football, you could be like, yeah, I can see that why you'd want to do that. But if you do understand football and understand how supporters work, you'd be like, what on earth are you doing? However, and then you've got you start with an unpopular manager in Duncan Ferguson, who I'd like to see less of. It feels like every time I open the internet or put the television on, Duncan Ferguson has been interviewed. Much preferred it when he had a bit more mystique about him, and you think, oh, that's that. Remember when he was a big Everton player? He doesn't really do the media. He does the media all the time. But the football was quite cautious. It was quite boring. They were quite a predictable side to play against. You knew what they were looking to do: get the ball out to Longstaff and hope something that happens. Just a real like handbrake on team. And then since they went into administration, that 15-point deduction, Ferguson leaving the club, Scott Kellacher coming in, I think they've been good. You know, they've uncovered one of the best players in the lower leagues in Moussa Dibaga, one of the great stories of him coming in. I think they've managed to sell a player like Keith Bray to Dunfermline Athletic, which is great to see young guys develop and go further up the food chain. And I think that the fact that they spent a lot of the season without a proper striker, I think they've generally done pretty well. And I think that, you know, a statement was put on their website on, I think it was Monday, saying that they're trying to reach that company voluntary agreement. They're confident it can be released. As a lot of it's to do tied up with land that's close round to the ground, but nevertheless they think it's going to be a success. If that's put in place, then I think they can go and win the division next season and get back to where they should be.
So I think you could be right in terms of potentially winning a division next season. Don't disagree with that. In terms of this season, I'd get the impression that a lot of Inverness fans are just absolutely delighted that it's finished. And I think there's been individuals within that squad. So whether it's, you mentioned Dibaga, like Keith Bray, Alfie Babbage that's came in on loan, and they've really enjoyed watching him. I think there's been some games that Inverness fans have really enjoyed, like the comeback win against Montrose. I think maybe 2-0 down and won 3-2. I absolutely love that game. And I maybe go back to, it was maybe February or the start of March, and actually the run of form under Kellacher was so good that actually they had an outside chance of potentially getting in the top four.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we kind of spoke about the fact that we actually started to compare it to the Dundee Defiant season, because they had like minus 25, and then they had such an incredible season. I thought, well, if this continues, they get in the top four, that's incredible. But actually, after that point, it wasn't quite a slump, but with about 2 or 3 weeks to go, like Annan still could have caught them. They lost a few games in a row. So because of that poor run of form that they had towards the end of the season, I'm not entirely sure that I can agree with you that Inverness have had a good season. I
suppose what I was thinking about as well, I was thinking about it just as connection between the fans and the players. You know, having been on, I'm going back to, I think it was in Christmas time, I was on the Wine a Shuffle podcast, which we reference quite a bit, given the fact it's quite an infrequent podcast, but when they do record, it goes quite deep. A deep dive into what's going on in Inverness. It rounds things up over the space of a couple of months. Very worthwhile listening to. I just think of the importance of the connection between the fans, the manager and the player. And I do think they've got that at the moment. They didn't have that at the start of the season, and they've got that now. And I think with guys like Scott Kellacher and Billy Mackay leading the club, some popular young guys coming through, I think they've signed quite well. I think guys like, or they're certainly in discussions with keeping hold of a lot of their better players for next season. I think they're in a good place at the moment. I don't think they were before. Maybe it's not just about like the season, having a good season is just necessarily about results on the pitch. It's a bit more than that, and maybe that's what I was going for when I talked about Cali Thistle.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not entirely sure I can quite agree, but okay. I see where you're coming from.
Okay. Well, let's. Do you just want to do all the good stuff and do all the bad stuff?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, go on. Makes then. Right, give us a good player then.
A good player. I've went for Adam Emsley.
Oh, now we're talking.
From Cove Rangers. The only thing I would say is I kind of forgot about the fact that Cove don't really do highlights. So I really wish I went for a player that had more highlights available. However, what I done was I don't know if you're aware of this now, but obviously there is a kind of joint login now for Y-Scout. But what you have to do is you have to kind of log in, then Joe Sked gets an alert on his phone, and then Joe Sked sends you the code.
Ah, right, okay, but two-factor authentication there.
But I didn't realise that, so I just went in the group chat and asked for a code, and then nothing happened. So I'm just like kind of hanging about. But I've not been on Y-Scout for a long time. But regardless, after getting a bit slagged off for that, I went into Y-Scout, looked at his goals. In fairness, almost all of them were away from home, so I probably could have found them on YouTube anyway. But regardless, I just thought he was one of the better players in League One last season. I know he was on loan from Aberdeen, but the amount of goals he scored, all very similar. Like the amount of goals that he kind of just drove in on the inside of one of the posts. Like that's not a fluke. That's obviously where he's intending to finish. I suppose he's really good at just running at a player and beating him. He gets loads of crosses into the penalty box. I just thought he was a class player for. I know we haven't always been complimentary about Cove, but I did think he was one of the main reasons that they managed to finish second in that division. You know something, I'm actually wiping a tear away from my eye that we're able to talk about a Cove player that isn't Blair Hewell, Connor Scully, Mitch Megginson, or Fraser Fivey. This is we are really in luxury territory here. Yeah, Emsley was really, really good. Emsley was really, really good, and I think that he really gave the team that sort of a degree of thrust and a degree of verticality that perhaps these other players don't quite give them. You know, he's quite quick off the mark. He's quite snappy. He's quite adventurous when he's on the ball. And I think that he did dovetail quite well with Mitch Megginson, even though he's not an out-and-out striker. You know, I think he's better coming off from the flanks. I think that what I'd hope for him is that, or certainly there's a bit of two-pronged. I think that the guys that they had, him, Finlay Marshall as well, had quite a strong season. You'd hope that these guys are integrated into Aberdeen team for next season. Like, say they go on, they take part in pre-season with Aberdeen. They play in the League Cup for them. That's what you want to see happen. You think that Emsley has shown enough in his time with Cove that Jimmy Tilleen might fancy giving him a shot, and which is great, which is ultimately what every team this far down the food chain wants to be. However, I'd worry from a Cove Rangers perspective that a lot of your good players that have beefed up the squad have been loan players all coming in from Aberdeen. I think that'll be the challenge for Paul Hartley for next season. I know we're kind of moving away from Adam Emsley here, but that would be the worry. You're not going to be able to have Adam Emsley again next year, I don't think. Yeah, I agreed. And as much as, I suppose, loaning clubs want to send players to where they've obviously been a success. Yeah. But I think Emsley's already proven himself at that level. So if Aberdeen do want to loan him out again, I mean, he's 19 at the moment, so maybe they would. You would imagine it's probably going to be a championship team. Yeah. So I wouldn't expect them to go back to Cove. And you're right, as much as that could be exciting for Emsley and it could be a massive benefit to a team in the second tier, you would imagine that does make a kind of massive hole in Cove's kind of creativity, I suppose, going forward next season.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be an interesting summer for Paul Hartley. I was actually talking to my mates about this, about Steny. I made the point, I think that the league's going to be I said this, but then immediately changed my mind on it. I said, I think the League One is going to be the 4 full-time teams, and then the part-time teams. It's going to be basically that, like, divided by that. And then I thought, well, hang on a second. Hamilton, who knows what state they're going to be in, and Cove Rangers appear to be making cutbacks. And then I was just thinking of the guys that are going out there, a couple of players out of contract. Emsley's away, Finlay Marshall's away, and then you start to think, might not be as cut and dried as that. So he's been hugely benefited them, and that's what I hope to see. I hope he does get a shot at Aberdeen. I think that Aberdeen after that good run of form that they had at the start of the season. I think that was the stat, wasn't it? They were the worst team in the Premiership.
I think over the last 22 or 23 games, it was like them and St Johnstone were roughly neck and neck at the bottom.
Get Adam Emsley playing, he'll sort you out. Jimmy Tilleen, if you're listening, I know you are. Let the boy play. Let the boy play. For my good player, Shaughan, I've gone for Queen of the South goalkeeper Ross Stewart, and I've picked him. So your face is lit up there.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, I think we were both reasonably critical of that signing for Queen of the South at the start of the season.
I remember at the time, I can't remember what order they came in, but Queen of the South had made a number of signings that you're going, that's a good signing. That's a good signing. Who else he signed? That's a good signing. And they were putting, I think it was Matty Douglas, Benji Luison, and it was all like Reece Lyon. I think were the players where it was all big, strong players with loads of personality, the kind of players that Queen of the South had been lacking. And then they signed Ross Stewart from Partick Thistle, and it's like, oh, you mean Ross Stewart from Sunderland? It's like, no, it's Ross Stewart from Partick. It's like, because I think that he didn't necessarily play much at Thistle. I think he was only a short-term agreement after leaving Hearts, because he was basically Hearts' third-choice goalkeeper. But he had a loan spell at Queen of the South. This was in the 1920 season, which is a bit of a black hole for a lot of people, because obviously it was curtailed because of the pandemic. And I find it, for that season, I find it really difficult to think of anything else that happened, even including Stennismuir in that. But what I do remember reading up on him was that he didn't have a particularly good time there. I think fans were quite cautious about it. And I think that, I might be wrong, but I think that I might be wrong in saying this, if I remember this right. Grinning Pete had said that he didn't have a number one in mind. He was basically going to share the goalkeeping duties between Stewart and Jay Hogarth, who had come on loan from Rangers, and ultimately Stewart was picked as number one. And I think he played every single minute of the league campaign. Certainly, if going by Transfermarkt, didn't miss a single minute in the league. I think they rotated in the Challenge Cup, somebody else played, and I think in the League Cup he played 2 games. I think Hogarth played the other 2 games. But turned out he had a really good season for Queens. And I think that the last time I properly kept an eye on his performance, it was against Stennismuir when they beat them 2-0.
He was exceptional.
He was exceptional. Really good performance. Being saved a couple of one-on-ones from Matty Yates. Saved a penalty as well for Corey O'Donnell. It was just that he's not a goalkeeper he associated doing with that, doing those sorts of things. And it's just it's great to see somebody who gets written off, proves to be wrong, and is actually pretty good, and someone who's maybe one of Queen of the South's best players over the course of the campaign.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know if you remember this, but I'm sure there was I can't remember if it lasted for his entire spell at Partick Thistle, but like every game, for a wee while there, every game he'd played at Hearts and every game he'd played at Partick Thistle, the team he played for got beat. I don't know if you remember that. And to be fair, like, also part of the problem was generally he'd given away a goal. Like, he was just he wasn't somebody who you would trust, even at championship level, which is why we kind of grimaced, I suppose, when he signed for Queen of South. But you're right. I think he's been excellent this season, and it's interesting because, and I'll caveat this with, when it comes to League One, but I think if you were to speak to fans of championship clubs, they would say the standard of goalkeeping and standard goalkeepers in the second tier has probably been quite poor. There hasn't been too many good goalies, I would say, in the Championship this season. But I wouldn't say that was the case in League One. I actually think there's been a lot of
that's a fair point, yeah.
And you might want to say yes for League One, but in terms of Tobaga, is it Suman or Suman. At Cove, like Aidan McAdams, and I know Darren Jameson hasn't been as outstanding as he was in League Two, but again, he's been absolutely fine in League One. But I think and Ross Stewart, Queen of South have maybe behind Tobaga the second best goalie in League One, and that's in a division that feels like it has some good keepers. So fair play to Grinning Pete for picking that signing out.
Yeah, fair play to Ross Stewart as well. I've said it a number of times. If I write someone off and get proven wrong, I always one of the first to put my hands up and say, I effed up there. I got that one wrong. So fair play to Ross Stewart. Now, Shaughan, give us a good manager brackets S close brackets.
I've went for David Gold / Colin Hamilton for their tenure.
You know what I've gone for as well? We can wrap this up into a phenomenon, because I went for Jordan Brown and Ryan Strachan at Peterhead, and it really seems to be the year of the co-managers. I think it was February where it was Gold and Hamilton, then Brown and Strachan, and in the Championship, Brian Graham and Mark Wilson that won the Championship co-managers of the month. It's quite an interesting phenomenon that's happened. It certainly was something that you didn't tend to see, but now you're seeing it with a greater degree of frequency.
Yeah, and so I'll probably, I don't want to sound like I'm kind of talking them up and then talking them down, but you have to bear in mind that they took over a club after Jim McIntyre was dismissed. They were bottom of the table. I think they had a couple of games, maybe 2 or 3 games where they were kind of caretaker manager, then appointed full time. Very much took that team from we knew it was a squad that was underperforming. Took it to the kind of January transfer window where they were doing very well. Then very much improved it again. And then, as much as it was still a tight division, I would say over maybe the kind of final third of the campaign, they very much kind of eased away from everybody else and doing it, playing a good style of football as well. I thought they were a good team to watch. Yeah. I think they're good to listen to. Well, certainly David Gold is good to listen to. After the game, I've been impressed by them very much so since they took over.
Can't disagree with any of that. Can't disagree with any of that. I think that they come into a team that were quite literally rock bottom. I think they were bottom of the champion. They were bottom of League One when they came in, and I think that they were difficult position to come into. But then they played their hand really, really well. And I say a lot of the time they were helped by a board that probably looked at that division and thought, you know what, we can. There's no outstanding team there. If we push the boat out, we can do it. And I think that particularly over the latter part of that season, when they were able to bring in Aaron Muirhead and Sam Staton and all that, they would really push through. And then in the mid-February, when they had that wobble, when they lost to Stennismuir on the late evening, the early evening kickoff, you're thinking, oh, this is a bit of a wobble. But then just were flawless between then and the rest of the season. I know that they got pumped in the last couple of games, like putting that down to the players being deeply hungover and letting some of the jobbers get a shot. But I think it's great. And on top of that, and actually quite similar to Brown and Strachan, guys who have got a long association with the club that have gone in there and who players identify with and players really want to see succeed. So that's obviously get a bit of a head start with that. But they repaid the faith that everyone had shown in them. Yeah, very much so. I think, and I know I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because we're talking about like who's impressed us this season. So that's why they've impressed me. I do think, I suppose, maybe some things have fell into their lap in terms of sometimes a new manager will take over a club, and the reason they've taken over is because they're not very good. But actually, I think this Arbroath squad was quite good when they took them over. I think in terms of loan signings, you've mentioned Muirhead. I think bringing in, like, whether Fraser Taylor landed in their lap or they particularly identified him to bring him in, don't know. I think they were beneficiaries of the Sam Stanton scenario. That all helped them. But regardless,
fascinated to see how they get on next season, because obviously it'll be a far bigger challenge, because they suddenly become maybe the favourites to go down. I don't know. I'm not sure. But regardless, this season, like I like Arbroath, so delighted to see them go back up, and I think they've done it in a good style.
Yeah, I'd say the same for Brown and Strachan. I was looking at, I mean, when they first took over that job, that would have been, I think, March 2023. They took over a terrible, Peterhead had an annus horribilis that season. If you remember, Jim McInally had, I think, on the whole, Jim McInally had done a really good job at Peterhead to try and, when you've got that, I always think it's a challenge when you're up in one of the more remote areas outside the Central Belt. It's quite difficult to attract players and keep them motivated and confident and all that. And I think he was able to do that. However, that final season he completely lost the run of himself with his recruitment. And rather than signing guys who you've seen play for Ayr United or Aberdeen youth players, you're signing guys from Egypt and like, was it Uganda and places like that. And you're thinking, what on earth are you doing here? And I felt for McInally, it felt like a really sad way to bow out at Peterhead. Uh-huh. He was replaced by David Robertson. And David Robertson just not the right fit for Peterhead. I remember, in fact, I was reading the interview that Roger Morrison, the chairman, gave after he left the club, and they said they found the results embarrassing. I think he'd been beaten 7-0 by Airdrie the week before he lost his job. And he left. And I think that there was no love lost between either party. I just don't think they liked each other, and it was just a relief for Robertson to get away. So the job gets handed to Strachan and Brown, and they're going into the following season. They finish in second place. They lose out ultimately to Stennismuir, and then the next season they go even one better. I think that I'd have fancied East Fife to win the division, or certainly Clyde actually was the team I fancied to win that division. But they were really good, and on top of that as well, I think they probably pay quite well, and I'm looking at guys like Cammy Smith and Peter Paulett and Rory McAllister, who I imagine would be on decent money from them. But I think they got value from it. I thought those guys all really played a big part in them getting them to where a club of Peterhead stature should be. And on top of that, really exciting to watch. And similar to David Gold, I think that Jordan Brown in particular is just a really interesting guy to listen to. Always got quite an interesting perspective on the game, and I think he's quite fair in what he says. So, very, very similar to Gold and Hamilton. I think that when the challenge next season isn't as severe for them as it is for Hamilton and Gold, obviously moving from League 2 to League 1, it's perhaps a bit more of a gentle incline than it is from League 1 into the Championship. I'd expect Peterhead I don't see why Peterhead don't think they could finish in the top 4, if we're being honest. I think that most teams will reckon they could finish top 4 in that league next season. But no, really enjoyed what I've seen from them, and I think that they're a good fit for the club going forward.
Yeah, I agreed. I think in terms of transfers, I think they certainly augmented what was left in terms of last summer. They improved that squad, but regardless, I still thought, if you look at the two teams on paper, it feels like East Fife have a better squad and a better starting 11, and the fact that they are, like, East Fife are looked after by Dick Campbell, who has so much experience. He will tell you he's had a number of promotions, whether it's 7 or 11. I'm not entirely sure.
7, I thought it was 15.
Well, but and it was interesting as well, because so not only did Peterhead play catch up, like East Fife had that advantage, Peterhead caught them up, and then it would have been quite easy with 2 games to go to maybe buckle, because it felt like it was a wee bit of pressure. After, was it Elgin that they lost to? And then
East Fife went bleaching, wasn't it?
And then East Fife went up there for what was it, like, kind of title decider. And then I kind of worried about, not worry, but I kind of did wonder if East Fife would turn them over. That wasn't the case. Over the piece, it looked like Peterhead were far better and won the game and won the league. So no, fair play to them. I think they've done very, very well.
And it was quite funny as well to see them be able to put one over Dick Campbell when he was talking about young managers. So that's very good, very good. But listen, Shaughan, we spent too much time talking about goodness. I think it's time we get into some people who have had a poor season. And we'll look at your the first club then. Which was the club had a bad season?
I've went for Montrose. So it's funny if you go back to, again, it would have been maybe slightly less than a year ago. We were at the kind of Montrose kind of fundraising day, and we spoke to Stuart Petrie, and we said to him, like, how do you think next season will go? And he said something along the lines of, if we finish 8th, I'd be quite happy with that. And we were like, come on, come on, you're always in and amongst the playoffs. Surely to goodness, you're not going to finish 8th. He was like, no, seriously, good bit less money coming in for whatever. I mean, we didn't ask him for details, but he just felt that the budget that they had, if they could stay up, then they'd be quite happy with that. And you know, something, even like halfway through, I thought, well, that might not be the case. Like, maybe they could still finish for top 4. But actually, it just feels like they have regressed quite a bit. And if it wasn't for maybe his own Sturton and Craig Whiten that came in in January, then maybe they could have been in a wee bit more bother than they would have been. And I know we talk about this every single summer. When we talk about the kind of preview podcast, but there's so many players in there that have been there forever, and I know it feels like they're just starting to turn it over. But I'm fascinated to see how this goes next season, because they were in a big degree of trouble this season. And as much as Stuart Petrie suggested that would be the case, maybe June, July, whatever it was last year, I actually didn't believe him.
Well, I think at that full-time whistle, you know that meme of Rafael Benitez taking his glass off and going over and shaking hands. Eventually, that's where 8th place was confirmed. Off with the glasses, out with a hand for a shake. I think Montrose. Yeah, it was. I think Fowler made a point. I think it was their team was either, you know, for a team you want balance of a range of ages, and it felt as though young guys taking the first steps in the game, Blair Lyons. Older guys that are perhaps reaching the end of their cycle. It felt as though there was too many of them. I think the balance of the squad was wrong. A lack of stardust, maybe a lack of legs in the middle of the park sometimes. Maybe an over-reliance on Owen Sturton to try and do something interesting, try over-reliance on Blair Lyons. And I think that on top of that as well, there was failures like Kane Hester didn't necessarily work out. And I think if we could, I've not selected him, but you talk about players that have had disappointing seasons. Hester might be one of them. Hasn't really achieved much since returning to Elgin City. But I think when you looked at the makeup of League One, and you were looking at, you would say the teams that were probably going to struggle at the bottom of the table: Dumbarton, Stenhousemuir, maybe Kelty Hearts. There was Montrose. I think that they perhaps finished where we expected them to. Maybe it's because they were in the playoffs last season, and I think it's quite difficult to, when you're a club like that, the next best thing for Montrose would be to get to the playoff final or to get promoted, and sometimes it's quite difficult to do that when big clubs come down or sort of clubs of similar nature, a similar stature come into the division. It's quite difficult to try and achieve that, particularly at League One level.
Did you think that Montrose would struggle quite so badly? And to be fair, I know there's probably not like not a million points between like where they finished in the top 4. To be fair, but I still thought they would have challenged a wee bit better. Albeit, admittedly, Stuart Petrie did say that he didn't see it this season coming.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you say, they've already, Craig Whiten's agreed terms with the club. Kieran Freeman has agreed terms with the club for next season. Michael Garden's retired. Paul Watson's moved on. So we are seeing that turnover in players. So who knows what will be next season? Got a bunch of boys for Heriot at Watt University. We'll see. For the club that I went, I'm going to stay in Angus. I went for Forfar Athletic. I thought they had a really, really bad season. Mm-hmm. And I think that had it not been for Bonnyrig's points deduction, it would have been them that would have been finished in bottom of the table. I think there was, when I think of Forfar Athletic, I always think of them. To me, they don't seem like a team that should be down at that level. They always seem to me to be a team that remember as you go back a couple of years, that team that had like Dylan Easton and Thomas Riley, John Baird. That was a team that was challenging to get into the championship. Mm-hmm. it just takes a bad managerial appointment or a bad transfer window to throw that into disarray. And I think that had been the case for a couple of years under Ray McKinnon, and the team were really boring to watch, found goals really difficult to come by. And then McKinnon moves on, Jim Weir comes in, and then you see at that point when they were 10 points behind Bonnyrigg, albeit with a couple of games in hand, and you're thinking, surely that's done for. And they did really well to turn over that deficit and eventually overtake Bonnyrigg. But then after that point, when they were 9 points clear going, was it 7 points clear going at the final games of the season?
Yep.
To ultimately finish level in points with Bonnyrigg, who were absolutely foul over points this season. And I think that everyone at that club will be like, we got away with one there. We absolutely got away with one there. And I think that it'll be similar to Stranraer last season, where it'd be like, well, this can't happen again. We cannot allow this to happen again. I just think sometimes you maybe need a really bad season where your very existence is at threat to know, like, right, we need to change what we're doing here, because this just, we're not going in the right direction.
So I agree. I think there's been some poor managerial appointments down the last, whatever it is, 2-3 seasons. But I think maybe it might be a wee bit harder for them in terms of, I don't think that's the only thing that's kind of hampering them. So in terms of their average attendance now, like they're one of the lowest average attendances in League Two. In terms of and we've talked about this a lot in terms of geography, like how do you attract players? Now, if you're willing to travel to Anglesey, and I know they probably don't train in the area, but if you have talent and you're willing to stay local or willing to travel to the area, presumably Arbroath is a team that you most want to sign for. After that, maybe Montrose. So unless you're willing to spend a wee bit more money, which I don't think Forfar have, then I'm not entirely sure how they attract either local players or attracting players from slightly further afield. And then the only positive thing you can say about them is, like, I thought defensively, like, they were okay last season, but they just didn't score any goals. So if you want to be reasonably positive about them going forward, it feels like defensively they have something to work on. But I think we mentioned it last season in terms of Skelly and McLean. They probably weren't going to score any goals, so that's something that Weir needs to work on. But I do think it's easier said than done, just because of ultimately where they are geographically and where they are. And financially, I suppose.
Yeah, it's all very easy to say that, they need to have a good transfer window. Fucking, you could, they need to sign a striker. All right, right, sound. There you go. You've listened to the Terrace podcast. I'm Craig Telfer. He's Shaughan McGuigan. We're the Ricky and Bianca of the Terrace. Cheers. See you later. You need to be a bit more thought than that. I think that's where. That's where the difficulty will come in terms of just making sure you sign the right profile of player, and that. But that, again, that's easier said than done. But but nevertheless, I think that a horrendous season for them, and I don't know if that after they went 7 points clear, they just down tools, cigars out. But they've been going at that final game of the season against Stirling Albion, just knowing, we just don't need to lose. As long as we don't lose. But thinking, Chris, well, you fucking could lose. And had they lost that match, they'd have finished bottom, and then you never know what might have happened. I think you'd have fancied perhaps them to acquit themselves better in the playoffs than Bonnyrigg did. But nevertheless, you should never have been in that state. And that's it. The fact that Bonnyrigg had that points deduction for like a slope in the pitch, which seemed, it did. I thought that the team deserved to be sanctioned. I know we're going off on a tangent, but I thought Bonnyrigg did deserve some sort of sanction or some sort of reprimand for the nick of the pitch, because anytime we talk about Bonnyrig's pitch, it's like you always have to put that big asterisk there saying, yes, the pitch is in an absolute nick. But I think at 6 points, I don't know if that seemed a bit overly harsh. But nevertheless, it gave everyone in that division a sort of like a wee head start on them, and even so, they had that wee head start. It was still one that Forfar almost fucked up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if those are the poor clubs, Shaughan, we'll talk about poor players. Who do you want to talk about?
I've went for Kyle Turner of Partick Thistle.
Yeah, I think that when I saw him return to Partick Thistle, I think a lot of people would have been like, well, that's a really good signing. You've got use the term, a Swiss Army knife of a midfielder, someone that can do a bit of everything, somebody can score goals, can set up goals. Is a wee bit of a nasty wee bastard in the middle of the park as well, in terms of putting himself about and winding opposition players up. And him and Thistle seem to be a really good fit. What could possibly go wrong?
So I messaged David Forrest, who listens to the show and does the draw, winner draw, Partick Thistle podcast. And I said to him, would you agree that Kyle Turner might be the kind of most disappointing Partick Thistle player this season? And it's funny, he said, well, I don't think anybody's had a stinker of a season. He goes, but probably everybody has been quite underwhelming. He goes, but the player that you would point to who has maybe been most underwhelming has been Kyle Turner. And I suppose it's now becoming if you can describe 2 seasons as a trend, then it is a trend. And I do wonder if maybe he's just rocking up at clubs at the worst possible time. So, like, we've literally complimented him now for, is it 10 years since he started playing for Stranraer? Yeah. And we've always been very complimentary about him all the way through. So Stranraer, Airdrie, whoever else he's played with. And he obviously got his chance in the top flight, which I wasn't surprised at because of how good he's been.
Yeah.
But listen, maybe he's not quite good enough to play at the top flight. Not sure. But at the same time, he's went to a Ross County team that was struggling. Then went on loan to Wraith Rovers season before the one that's just finished. But he arrived just at the time that rather than Ian Murray, like everything being manic, Ian Murray was starting to become a wee bit more, how would you describe it?
Measured.
Yeah. So maybe it wasn't quite the right time for him to arrive at Stars. But regardless, I was a wee bit disappointed at him. I thought it was a great signing, but he didn't do quite as much as I thought he would have done. Then goes back to Partick Thistle. Bear in mind, they'd had 2 seasons there where he either set up loads of goals or scored quite a lot of goals as well. But this season, he hasn't really done either of those things. And I appreciate that he's maybe had to fill gaps at times.
He's played at fullback at points, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I think he played right back before, but not on too many occasions. But regardless, it's just been as it has been for a lot of players at the Partick Thistle, a kind of underwhelming season for him.
I think so as well. Just the times I would put all the times I'd watched Thistle were on the television, and he was always one of the players that you would see his name on the team line. You think, all right, well that's a good player. We're going to get something like the equivalent of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Commando from in terms of that degree of action. It never quite happened, and I wouldn't say the game passed him by, but the Kyle Turner I'm used to watching is someone who, like you say, grabs the games by the scruff of the neck. Like sort of shapes the play in his own image. Can really, and I mean the only massive thing I remember him doing was I'm sure this is just off the top of my head, but it was him that put the ball in that ultimately led to Ablade scoring against Falkirk. That was the only really standout moment, and that's from a set piece. And I think Kyle Turner's got a lot more to his game than just set pieces. So yeah, just a bit of a flat season for him, and it'll be interesting. Is he still under contract at Thistle? Yeah,
so I think he's got another year, and again to defend him, I suppose. Not that either of us are kind of sticking the boot in. I do think he's kind of had to plug gaps both at Partick Thistle and even Wraith Rovers the season before. But it'll be interesting to see who comes in terms of the next Thistle boss and whether they build their team around him, because I do think he is. I think he's a very, very good championship player. Still only 27, so hopefully, fingers crossed, he does well going forward.
Definitely, good player. Now, for my poor player, for my bad player, I want to make it clear that I'm not really talking about this player. I'm using this as a gateway. This is a jumping off point, as it were, to talk about a team's like really, really bad recruitment. And I'm using this player to signpost that, because I think it's really shitty to have to go after like an 18-year-old who's making his first steps in the game. The player I want to highlight is Ephraim Yeboah at Dunfermline Athletic. And I think that 12 appearances, no goals, signed from the Bristol City Academy, I believe, on loan. There's a data-driven approach from the new owners to try and sign players based on their statistics rather than the eye test. And I think Yeboah, if you're being charitable, you would say that he worked really hard up front. And I think that's about as best as it got for him at Dunfermline.
So it's funny because I always read about the fact that he was really poor, but didn't necessarily see it because when I watched highlights, he was never really involved. So when you said you were going to pick him, I was like, I'm going to go back and watch the games that he played 90 minutes, and I do think that's part of the problem as well because they had so few options because Chris Kane is generally somebody who is injured. Then Yeboah had to play so many minutes. But I watched the highlights of a game against Queen's Park where it looked like he was, to be fair, it looked like he was kind of wide left. And then I watched that was 0-0. And I watched the highlights of their 1-0 loss at Hamilton.
Yeah, that was
he played through the middle. But I'm trying to think what the opposite of right place at the right time is. I'm guessing it's the wrong place all the time. Maybe because so let's say he was kind of wide left, there was never any footage of him creating a chance down the left hand side, and then see when maybe Dunfermline had to defend, he always seemed like he was a mile behind play, and then see the Hamilton game when they lost 1-0. I mean, God bless him. I don't know where he was supposed to be playing at this point, presumably up front because I thought certainly looked like he started the game up front. But when Hamilton, just as they were, I can't remember what happened. Was it Tumulty that scored the goal regardless?
I think it was, aye.
Let's say he scored for the edge of the box.
Oh, McKinstry. It was McKinstry that scored.
Was it McKinstry? Right, okay. So Yeboah was just coming into Shaughan. It's I'm not entirely sure why you're tracking back, but fair play to you. But again, he has no impact whatsoever as Hamilton score. So funnily enough, I went back and I looked. So he's played 43 league games, which feels quite a lot for an 18-year-old. His 2 goals haven't come in the league. They've come for Doncaster against Manchester United under 18s in the EFL Trophy and Huddersfield. And see if you just look at those goals. See if you just look at those 2 moments. You can understand why somebody might take a chance on them because quite good finishes, quite good goals. But I suppose when it comes to playing against adults, I suppose it's a different world.
Yeah, you're up against the likes of Sean McGinty, Dylan McGowan. You're going to get shoved around, and I think it was the game where I went to see him. We'd spoken about that in a podcast, that match between Hamilton and Dunfermline, where I had gone. This was, I think, it was reaching a bit of a crescendo about the ill feeling from Accies fans towards Jim Goodwin. And Jim Goodwin, John Rankin, and they were, I deliberately positioned myself quite close to the home bench. So I think, this is going to get tasty. And then it turns out that the Accies actually played quite well in that match. One of the few games they actually did all right. But one of the reasons that they were allowed to not dominate the match, but have the lion's share of the play was because Yeboah was playing up front with his back to goal, and you're up against McGinty and McGowan, who are just going to just shove you about a bit. And the point to I wanted to bring him in is because I think that in this you could have brought them into, you could actually hit Dunfermline for your bad club and bad manager actually for these, but Dunfermline had an absolutely honking season, and maybe you might actually say pound for pound. I'd need to check 28 goals over 36 games. Is that the worst in the SPFL? Maybe Bonnyrigg might have been worse. I'm not sure, but the vast majority of them came at East End Park, so certainly away from home. They barely scored any goals whatsoever. So if you were a Dunfermline fan that went to every game, then my goodness, your kind of away journeys must have been awful. They had, and I'm sure over the latter part of the season, the only player other than Chris Kane to score a goal was Ewan Otto. Am I right in saying that? Yeah. Other than Kane, they were absolutely knackered for goal scoring. I'm just looking goals for. Forfar got 29 goals. So there you go. So they're the lowest scorers in the lower leagues, like Dunfermline Athletic. And it just seems unfathomable for a team of Dunfermline stature to be to be struggling for goals. But it goes back to them having a bad season. Bringing in Michael Tidser, the fans had rejected James McPake's style of football. They were at their best over the course of the season when Lanzarote John McLaughlin was in charge. And they actually were a wee bit more direct and a wee bit more fun to watch. So to bring in a manager who likes to be a bit more slow and methodical with his play, just what were you thinking? We've seen this for a couple of years. We were fed up of it and we're going back to it. And then to not really give Tidser a hand in the transfer market, where it was, I reread that Courier article. It was a deep dive into his time at East End Park, and it said that I think 9 players had come to the club, but only one of them was in his recommendation. I think that was Archie Stevens, who came in on loan from Rangers. And I think that I even remember Connor Young, who I'd lauded at his time at Edinburgh, and I remember thinking that what's Connor Young good at? You put hard-working players in, you put a guy like James Stokes in who can do all the running for him and create the space for Young, who's really good and really finding space, getting the ball into his left foot and shooting. And they were playing him as a right winger. So the idea that he'd come onto his left foot, it's like, you've just watched the guy score like 20 goals for like one of a team who's expected an absolutely terrible season. Why are you not trying to? I know it's like you've got to be adaptable and all that, but what are we doing different? Why are we trying to do something differently here? And Tidser will go down as one of the worst managerial appointments of the decade. And I don't think Tidser's a bad manager. I do not think Tidser's a bad manager. I think he'll go elsewhere and be successful. It's just that, like what do you say, the right place at the right time, the wrong place everywhere. That was like Michael Tidser's time there. That was Tidser there. It'll go down. That was an absolutely horrendous season for Dunfermline. And I think that in terms of the bad player, I do not want to dig out an 18-year-old taking his first steps in the game. because I think it was a bit of a culture shock for him to come up to Scotland, to be expected to lead the line for a struggling team. I think that's hard for most players, even guys that have got like 10, 15 years experience. That's a big ask. So it's a huge ask for an 18-year-old. However, that just felt emblematic of how bad it had been for Dunfermline. So I hope that's clear. Jumping off point to talk about Dunfermline.
No, I appreciate it. He's French as well. I didn't realise he was
Italian.
I thought he was English.
Italian.
Italian. I thought he was English.
No, Ghanaian Italian.
So I suppose he's trying to integrate to a new country as well. So fair play to him. But he was rubbish.
You know who else is Ghanaian Italian? Alfie Aguiman.
There you go. He's done okay.
He's done all right. He's going to be a Premiership footballer next season. Class. Yeah. It's class, man. Class. I actually really can't wait to see how Falkirk get on in the Premiership next season. Brilliant. Can't wait for the new season. Anyway,
they just keep extending deals for players I'm not entirely sure are up to the standard required, but we'll see.
I mean, it's all about team spirit. It's all about team spirit and making sure that you've got the positive atmosphere around the place. Those players will be absolutely buzzing to go for next season. I think in terms of that, they'll be able to dig each other out if it's not going to be. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Falkirk. And in fact, on this podcast, we're going to have 12 months at the very least without talking about Falkirk. Talk about St Johnstone for a change. My goodness. What a treat. What a treat getting to talk about the Perth Sainties when we do our big lower league podcast. Sean Hamilton, if you're listening, expect a call. I don't have a fucking clue about St Johnstone. But we'll talk, Sean, about a manager who had a poor season.
I went for John Rankin. And I suppose it's been disappointing in several areas, I suppose. So, firstly, did you read the Supporters Trust that had 2 separate interviews with Colin McGowan and then the Hamilton board? I don't know if you read that. Was that where
Colin McGowan said, I'm paraphrasing it, but if you call someone gay enough times, people will start to think they're gay?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. So what I took from that is everything behind the scenes at Hamilton is quite chaotic. So if I was John Rankin, I would imagine, or anybody that's employed by Hamilton, I'd imagine it's quite a difficult place to work. It just feels quite chaotic. So that's the first thing. Then you had the situation where Hamilton have a big squad, and I think both of us maybe expected them under Rankin to do a wee bit better than what they did. So they'd certainly underperformed the next thing was, I think both you and myself have experienced the amount of kind of vitriol that Rankin gets. If he just, even if he just comes out the dugout,
get back in your fucking box, you.
So, like, it felt like, I think, again, if you go back to maybe whether it was February or March, it felt like the Rankin could not possibly continue at that club. And then they started to put like a wee run together, and I was like, oh, actually, Hamilton are going to survive. And Hamilton fans, from what I could read, they were like, oh, fair play to John Rankin. Actually, he might have done okay. And then they got a massive points deduction, so it didn't matter. None of that mattered whatsoever. So they got relegated. But that just felt like one of the, like, there is no element of that campaign that John Rankin could have enjoyed.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Rankin's got his faults, that in terms of like setting up a team, substitutions and all that, how to build attacking play and all that. Rankin, I think Rankin's got his qualities, but I think as a manager, you know, you talk to Hamilton fans, even regardless of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, I think that's difficult. He's not very popular. I don't really think that's, even winning promotion at the first time of asking, that's not going to change. When people point out and say, John Rankin got you promoted, well, who fucking took us down in the first place? You know? One of the things, though, it must be that, like, I remember when we did the big preview 12 months ago, and I think one of the things that we said about Hamilton was their squad was huge. And we'd expected like a number of players to get moved on. I don't necessarily think that has happened. So it must be, imagine John Rankin, you've got like about 24 players to try and train and manage. That must be so difficult. And then you pitch up and you're off and you get a knock at the door. It's Jerry Strain. John, I've got a surprise for you. What is it, Jerry? Have a guess. Is it another player, Jerry? Yeah, another player. And he just runs away down the corridor. And all of a sudden he's got another 3 midfielders that he's got to try and work out what to do with. So I think that's difficult. That must be so difficult. It's like, if your club's just like low maintenance and nothing interesting happens, it must be easy to work within that, because you can't even know going into your work and you know what you need to concentrate on and know what you need to do every day. Not a Hamilton. Not a Hamilton. Just, it's like the stuff there about like the showers getting turned off and the like grass being put into the tractor's engine and stuff, a petrol tank and stuff. It's like, how do you fucking deal with it? I think that John Rankin might not necessarily be a fantastic manager, but I do think I admire him in some degree for having to put all that. We've again spoken about it in the past, where you just think John Rankin's like, what am I doing here? I don't need this. Yeah,
I totally. I think he's done quite well under the circumstances. Fair play.
Yeah, so maybe do you want to take John Rankin out of that bad manager bit?
Nah, he's still done quite rubbish.
Aye. Oh, right. Well, for my bad manager, I've gone for Ian McCall at Clyde, and I think that his year in charge of the club was so underwhelming to the point that I can't imagine we'll ever see McCall return to frontline management.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think that, and it's no. I don't want to say I've met Ian McCall once, and again, you meet these people and say that you like them, because I think fundamentally, like 98% of the people on the planet are actually sound. You know, I do. I mean, I met him. Me and Robert Borthwick met him in the pub in the West End of Glasgow, and we're chatting away to him for 5 minutes, and he was really sound. He was really sound. So it's not a personal thing, but I think that the biggest takeaway I got from it at Clyde was just like, he didn't seem that interested. It felt as though he'd rather be somewhere else.
Yeah. And I know, like, what comes across in a post-game interview isn't necessarily what he's putting in on the training ground or on a Saturday during the game. But I totally agree that did feel like an element of part-time football wasn't suiting him. He wasn't that interested. But I suppose the worst aspect was the amount of money they spent on putting a squad together. And so it felt unbalanced, the squad. Like we said, they'll win the league easy. But you do wonder in terms of, like, if Ian McCall wasn't that interested, I did think at the time, actually, but I didn't really dwell on it. But you know how, like, sometimes a manager will say, And I never really put too much weight in it, but they'll say, oh, well, we're not just really looking to recruit good footballers, we're looking to recruit good people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think off the top of my head, and I won't mention names in case it's not the case, but certainly a couple of players that they brought in over the summer, off the top of my head, I know there's been issues with suggestions that their attitude hasn't been great. So maybe that was a bit of the issue in terms of, not just in terms of the quality that they brought in, but whether it was players that really cared that much. I don't know.
There's probably a degree of that. I think I know the players you're talking about, going by a former manager's interview that he gave to a very large podcast in Scotland. So kind of narrowing it down, the people listening be like, why don't you just fucking say who it is? Join the dots as we treasure hunt for you there. I think it was with McCall, the beginning of the season. I remember when they were signing all these players, and on paper they look like good players, and you think that, wow, that's like Tommy Robson coming for Queen's Park. And it wasn't like Tommy Robson the previous season had like flopped at Queen's Park. Tommy Robson, I think, had a pretty strong season, but maybe he was looking to go into part-time, and Clyde were able to offer him a fair chunk of money that means that he could basically have full-time wages but on a part-time contract, something like that, or whatever. But when you were signing guys like that, you were thinking, this looks really good. But then I remember, maybe it was probably smart after the fact, because I didn't think they would win the division, but I was looking at that team and thinking, they just seemed quite unbalanced. They were just like, I think he had too many good players to pick from. I think I remember saying that, he had too many good players to pick from, where it was really difficult to try and find a balanced squad. And I think they were quite soft down in the middle. They didn't really score goals. And it says a lot that the whole season peaked right at the very beginning, when they beat Partick Thistle in the League Cup, and Logan Dunnicky had that game when he looked like prime Drogba. But I think that McCall's whole time at Clyde, and I think it's to look at how mediocre it was. I think you compare it to Alan Hale at Elgin, who came in roughly around the same time as him, and Alan Hale has now been there for 18 months, and he's taken Elgin from a side who I think a lot of people, again, myself included, thought would finish bottom of League Two, and it's taken that period now to where they're challenging to get promoted. I mean, they finished in fourth place there. They played Annan in the playoffs, gave it a pretty good goal, but just fell short. And whereas Clyde haven't changed at all, despite having so much money to have played with. And that's a warning. I suppose that's when that money isn't always a guarantee for success. But it just shows that Clyde, having spent all that money, completely overshot their budget. And this isn't Ian McCall's fault. If you've been told you've got £1,000 to spend on a player, and you go and spend it, and then your boss comes out and say, sorry, have you spent all that £1,000? Yeah, how come? Is that only supposed to be £400? You know, where Clyde's like future is up in stake, just at how much money is being wasted on nothing. You know, that way where if I always think about like Hearts under Romanov. Yeah, they spent money they didn't have. A couple of Bosnian pensioners lost their savings. Everyone had a good time though. When's the last time Clyde had a good time?
So I tell you where I will disagree. So I agree with you that Alan Hale has obviously done a far better job at Elgin than Ian McCall done at Clyde, and I think it will have impacted if he does get any offers going forward, I think it will have an impact. However, I suspect that Ian McCall has far more friends in football than certainly in the Central Belt than Alan Hale does. So I still wouldn't be surprised if, as bad as McCall did at Clyde, if he gets some kind of job at a struggling full-time team, or even a kind of half-decent part-time team.
I think you're right, actually. I think you're right. That's something I hadn't considered. Maybe what I should have changed, I said maybe for his, put him off frontline management. Maybe that's what I should have said there, than rather like a team. You're right. Say you are. God, I'm just trying to think. Actually the options. See, Queen's Park, right? Just say for Queen's Park, for instance, they have got a chance of going down, but still got a chance of staying up there, and they want to move Shaughan Crichton on and just go in a different direction, like with around February time. Then you think McCall would be someone, he's got the reputation in the game. Yeah. You could say that his career broadly has been pretty good, other than the spell at Clyde, and you can see that as at part. I'm not accustomed to working at part-time level. I need to be seeing the players on a day-to-day basis, and all that could be explained away. So yeah, I think you're right. It might just have put him off doing it. Maybe wants a role where I think he was quite keen on the director of football job at Partick Thistle.
Yeah, it was obviously
before went to
he had a couple of interviews where he was very much kind of flashing his eyelids, I suppose, at it, but that didn't transpire. So what is he? Maybe 60 now, but interesting to see where he goes. He obviously has media work, so maybe he's not interested. But I still think he will get an offer from a struggling championship team, and he will take it up.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. I expected a lot. Remember when he went in at Clyde, you're thinking, wow, that's Ian McCall. That's a really good sign. And it never really happened for him. I know you've got to say he'd been dealt quite a bad hand, but in terms of like the squad that he had, that Jim Duffy, Brian McLean.
He then got offered a very good hand by how much money he had to spend.
But then what I was going to say was that Alan Hale was dealt a bad hand. Who was it? Was it Ross Draper? And then he decided he didn't fancy being managed anymore. And Barry Smith came in, and then Barry Smith just like, this is actually too much for me. And so you're coming to a squad that don't know whether to do. This isn't about Alan Hale. Alan Hale's had a really good season. But Ian McCall hasn't. So I might not have put him off might not have put clubs off approaching him, but it might have put him off managing. I don't know. But I'd bracket him. What I'd say about McCall, I would say the same thing about Tidge. I don't think he's a bad manager.
Agreed. No, totally agree.
It's interesting. Something that when John Robertson was in A View from the Terrace, and it's an interesting idea. It's that in any other job, if you're experienced, like say you're an experienced like kitchen fitter, or you're an experienced tree surgeon, or an experienced like heart surgeon, like the fact you've been doing the job for decades, folk think, well, that's class, I've got somebody that knows what I'm doing. But in football, when someone's got too much experience, think, oh, he's too old, he's past it, he's not for it anymore. I wonder why that's the case.
I know, but if you're cutting down trees, then the way to cut down trees doesn't really change over the decades. But in terms of managing a dressing room, it does. Just because you've been cutting down trees one way doesn't mean if they say here's a new better way to cut down trees, well, this is the way I've always done it. That's a bit unfair. No, but managers very much have to move on. Like, they have to move with the times. They have to, like people change. No, I'm not entirely sure if I entirely buy into that. Well. Listen, you don't have to. It's just we're just spitballing here, man. We're just spitballing. That's the whole point of these podcasts. But I always think that when the more that you do them, and the more that you like, we're just going to use like Sunday for example, you spend time with people. It's like, I always think if you're going to be critical of someone, and you have to do this when you're doing podcasts. Not everything can be amazing. You do have to be critical. You always think there's the person behind it. No one wants to be bad. No one wants to be bad. So of course, absolutely. It's always difficult. So you got to caveat it. It's like it's not personal, because you do meet these people, and like I say, like 90 times 100, they're all sound. So I just feel a bit bad. Like you do more stuff like this, and it just people listen and think, oh, that boy was slagging me off, and I don't mean to do that. It really feels like you're worried about bumping into Jim Goodwin in a toilet again. Great guy. Oh, he's immaculate as well, by the way, as you can imagine. As you can imagine, just so well trimmed and so well put together. I had a great night on Sunday. Good. Pleased to hear. We'll leave it at that, shall we, Shaughan? Might as well. Well, thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Shaughan won't be, but I'm going to be back tomorrow to do a review of the Premiership playoff final first leg between Livingston and Ross County. I think it's Joel Sked that I'm doing that podcast with. That's a real crossover episode there, like when Coronation Street and Emmerdale did a sort of dual storyline kind of thing. So Joel and I don't spend a lot of time with one another, so I look forward to that. That's on Patreon. If you want to listen to it, you'll need to subscribe for as little as £2 a month. You can access to hours and hours and hours of content. It's patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. I think that's about it. So, there's only a handful of games of the season remaining. 3, I think, in the SPFL. Or 2 in the SPFL, 1 in the Scottish Cup.
So if you're going to a game, enjoy yourself. But unlike me, who's been cheeky to football players his entire career, please do so respectfully. Thank you.